Hello, my name's David.
And I'm Russell.
And this is Old News.
Old News.
How are things on the domestic front this week? Any disasters?
No, very stable and almost boring, to be honest.
Marvellous. No news is good news.
Yeah.
But that's no good for old news, I suppose.
It's not.
That's a carrier theme. So, should we do, what is a traditional podcasting and YouTube thing, and give apologies for lateness on our schedule?
Yeah. So, as we mentioned last time, our schedule was a week out because of Russell skipping the country.
It's all above board. All above board.
Apparently he's going to do it again later this week. He's off to
Amsterdam.
Yeah, but then it was spoiled even more by the fact that I took nearly a week to edit the last programme and get it out there.
I think, in fairness to you, it was because we were talking about something that was potentially politically explosive, and we took our time getting our words right.
Yeah.
Which meant you had double the number of ums, ers, and pauses to delete.
Yes. we did speak quite slowly as well. I don't know if anyone noticed that. I noticed we were both speaking quite slowly. We also we both have a habit of saying and but then we run on into other words. So it's and but blah, 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 blah. That's almost impossible for me to cut out. If we just went pause and said something, it would be fine.
It's funny, isn't it, how as children, when we're learning to write in sentences and paragraphs, we get told off by teachers saying, do not use the word and all the time. Stop using the word and, because it's this natural thing to go and this, and that, and the other, and this, and that. And yet we do it all the time in speech. It's just a habit we never break.
You start sentences with but and, which you're not supposed to, but in natural speech, you do, very much so. In fact, there's an argument to say the rule about not starting sentences with, what are they?
A conjunction?
Conjunction?
Yeah, for joining, isn't it? For joining phrases together.
It shouldn't really be a rule because it's entirely...
It's just a stylistic thing that's beaten into you because you would naturally do it in written text as a child.
Yeah.
Well, it's old news.
So today represents an interesting innovation in the production of Old News, and that our topic has come from a suggestion from a listener.
It's come from my friend and colleague Graham at work.
Who is a jolly good egg, and who suggested the topic of what?
Chernobyl.
Yeah, the Chernobyl accident or Chernobyl disaster, depending.
Yes.
This will be our topic for discussion. And it's interesting sort of return back to technology and engineering themes, but we don't want to get bogged down with that. So have we had much in the way of feedback?
We've had very little feedback.
A little feedback. We did get good reviews from one listener about the Dolly the Sheep episode.
All right.
Which was greatly enjoyed.
Old news.
I have a question for you, David. Do other podcasts exist, or are we the only one in the world?
I believe, I have been led to believe that there are other podcasts.
It's been rumoured.
Yeah, there are other people sort of just shouting into the ether like we do.
Like we are, shouting to a black hole. I've asked this question with an ulterior motive because there's a podcast out there called The Last Tuesday Project.
It's a fun idea. I love their concept for a podcast.
And I think in contrast to Old News, where we kind of discuss in a bit of a free-form way with some notes in front of us, theirs is all about having a subject. They don't know what it is in advance. They go away for an hour and do research, and then they come back and have a discussion that's led by one of the group. It is fun. It is fun and interesting and wide-ranging.
I do like the idea that the person who comes up with the idea is called, well, actually, are they called the Dimbleby, the Dimblebee, or the Dimblebean? I'm not quite sure. I should ask them.
We should ask them, yeah.
I think it's Dimbleby.
But we think that The Last Tuesday Project is a very good podcast. There's perhaps something that our audience would enjoy, and perhaps their audience might find our work interesting as well.
Their website is lasttuesdayproject.com, or you can find them on iTunes or your podcasting app of choice simply by searching for The Last Tuesday Project.
Old news.
So, shall we move on to one more thing which we haven't mentioned, the return of the homebrew beer as we record.
We haven't done this since the first episode.
This is the beer of indeterminate strength, so if I start to slur...
I believe yours is stronger than mine.
Alright.
Yeah.
This is perhaps a poor choice.
You've got Christmas beer.
Is it Christmas 2014 or Christmas 2015?
Christmas 2015, I think that's the later batch. Yeah,
right, so it's not that old.
I think I'm back on the Canadian ale again,
which is very, very nice. But isn't that absurdly strong?
Yeah, this particular bottle doesn't. Hang on.
Oh, that's going to sound disgusting.
Yeah, it doesn't. This maybe it's not Canadian ale. It's possibly one of the other lighter ones. I can't really tell. It's not as strong as the last ones we had.
It's drinkable anyway.
It's nice.
Tastes nice. So shall we move on to the question at hand? The Chernobyl
nuclear disaster.
Disaster. Yeah, we're improving our diction. Does diction improve? No, also pronunciation.
I don't think we should be changing our accent.
Disaster. Somebody was asking the other day, where's the R in Bath? Good question, right?
But would you pronounce it differently for getting in a nice hot bath or the town of Bath?
I would say the town of Bath. I really would.
You see, because people on the BBC have been told to say Newcastle rather than Newcastle.
Alright, so that has to be pronounced in the same way. I guess if the Chinese can insist on Beijing, then we can insist on Newcastle.
Yeah. Perhaps the people of Bath can insist on Bath.
Oh, well, perhaps they can. Well, they can insist to me personally at some point in the future.
They can send a petition.
Yeah, that's right. The Chernobyl accident happened on the 26th of April 1986.
Damn you, that's the one fact I've got written down.
Right. Do you want to introduce the fact?
No, it's alright.
It's already been done. Yeah, April 1986. I am 5 years old. This is before I can really remember. I can remember Chernobyl appearing in news items on and off as the years go by, and this is very, very famous footage. But JFK test, do you know where you were? Do you remember it? I mean,
I remember it. I remember it happening. I remember seeing the news. I don't remember where I was. It actually happened in the middle of the night, so I would have been in bed.
Yeah, well, the other thing is, of course, is that we in the West found out in dribs and drabs, which is perhaps something we can look at later. Yeah, there's this sort of one singular event that happens over a number of hours. Then obviously there's this enormous clear-up operation that happens afterwards. But it takes a long time for information to really filter through. It takes a long time for information to filter through within the Soviet Union. At this point. So it's worth reminding ourselves that Chernobyl is in the Ukraine, and the Ukraine was, of course, part of the Soviet Union at that point. Yeah, so it didn't. Interesting. It spectacularly fails the JFK test because who knows where we all were, and we didn't find out till days later. One of the things I find interesting, just to sort of set the scene a little bit, and in the first section I've entitled Us versus Nuclear Power, which is slightly different from Us versus the Bomb with Korea in the first episode. Do you remember there was a film called 1 Hour to Zero, which was a Children's Film Foundation film?
Yes. I don't remember much about it. I remember a few scenes.
Yeah. So just to explain to people who may not have heard of the CFF, the Children's Film Foundation was one of these sort of quasi-government organisations that produced kind of subsidised films for children. And I remember them being shown on TV in the 80s, but they used to be shown with projector films sort of in schools.
I remember seeing them projected.
Yeah.
We had film nights in primary school.
Yeah.
And it was often... Not always, but it was often CFF films.
And I always remember this one because I couldn't remember the name, but I could remember the imagery, and I had to go look it up. But I always remember because it centres around a imminent nuclear power plant disaster in North Wales.
That was one of the things that stuck in my mind.
And one of the things why it was so eerie was there was this absolutely deafening silence during the film, because there's a part where the kids who are the protagonists, they go back to the village where they're sort of based, and the village has been evacuated in the meantime because of the impending disaster and whatever. And that was a really strong emotional thing, like a very sort of fearful reaction I had about that.
Yeah. What amazes me is that they made a children's film about that subject.
Yeah. Interestingly, do you know when it's from?
When it's from?
Yeah.
I would say late 70s, I would guess.
1976.
Yeah, right.
And I thought, well, 1976, does that sort of go hand in hand with 3 Mile Island? But it doesn't. 3 Mile Island happens in 1979.
Right.
So this is an unusual thing that these sort of fears were there. And I suppose Britain had the history of the accident in Windscale in the late 50s, didn't it? Which was a very small fire, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Fire and release of radiation through smoke. smoke and whatever.
A chimney,
yeah, through a chimney. And that actually, there was a very good thing in the papers a couple of years ago about the engineer that he died, he
died recently.
Yeah, and he was the guy who insisted that they have the big filters on top of the chimneys.
And if he hadn't done that, it would have been much worse.
A far worse disaster.
Old news.
I didn't want to bang on too much about the technology of the disaster because people can go read that if they want. But as an engineer, I got drawn into it, and apparently the accident is caused by this test they're running that night. It was meant to happen during the day, and then the evening shift came on, like more delays, and then finally the night shift were doing this. So typically engineering disasters happen in small hours of the morning, and when people are on night shift, it's like that is so common. And so there's this whole thing whereby when you shut down a nuclear reactor, it's called SCRAM, and I can't remember what SCRAM stands for, but it's where you just go clonk, stop, right? You stop the main fission reaction, but you've got all the byproducts that are continuing to fall apart, and they generate huge amounts of heat. So you go SCRAM, stop, but then you've got to keep cooling it because you've got to take the heat out of everything that's still sort of doing the biz. So the idea was that if there was to be a total power failure, the reactor would go scram, and there was 3 emergency diesel generators to come on, and then that would power the pumps. Power the pumps to keep the cooling going. So if I'm losing you in the engineering detail here, okay, fine.
No, I read this bit, so
right. So
I'm following you so far.
Right, so they had to develop 5.5 megawatts of power to drive the pumps. It's a huge amount of power, right? But it took 60 to 75 seconds to get those generators started running up to speed and on to load. And so you've actually got 60 to 75 seconds where the thing isn't being cooled and it's getting hotter and hotter and hotter. Right? And so they had recognized that this was a fault, and so they had decided the idea was that you scram the reactor and you trip the steam to this going to the turbine, and there's enough momentum in the turbine
to keep generating electricity.
Yeah, that keeps the generator going, and you've just got this sort of transitory bit of power. The reactor comes online in 1982 commercially for the first time. Right? They run this test in 1982. It fails. They run this test in 1984, it fails. They run the test in 85, and it fails. And now we're up to the 4th year of operation in 1986, and they're doing the same test to get this damn system to work. And it's still like, really? Nobody thought that this fundamental gap, this like 60-second gap, this is a showstopper. Surely it's a showstopper.
Well, it would be in the West, not in the Soviet Union in those days, you wouldn't have thought. I'm not at all surprised.
Well, it's so depressing though, isn't it? I mean, you say that. I mean, in the West, you remember it's got commercial pressures to deliver, and you forget that a lot of our industries were ran on sort of everybody keep mum, it'll all be all right on the night. So like we were not totally immune to this type of behaviour, and I think that the test was being done at the end of a maintenance period, and they would sort of install new systems and whatever, but in order to run the test, they disabled a whole load of the
safety,
the manuals, the automatic safety systems. And there was one of the things I didn't realise, there was a computer as well that was meant to control certain aspects of the operation, and that computer was disabled as well. Everything was being ran manually, and it amazes me because what amazes me now as an engineer, and I don't know how to put this delicately, I still see this attitude amongst engineers now
that they can do it better than the machines can.
This thing isn't working properly, I don't understand what's happening, let's switch the computer off and run it manually. I'm always going, for God's sake, let the automation do its job. Computer knows best. I think this is like one of these sort of early instances of that, sort of in the early days of digital control. This is what happens. But interesting, what has been the challenge in engineering since that sort of era up to the present day is now a challenge that's going to happen to ordinary folk. Do you trust your computer-driven car? Or do we get rid of airline pilots? I have a friend who's a very strong advocate for getting rid of airline pilots.
It makes total logical sense because
airline pilots kill more people than aeroplanes do.
But can you imagine a 747 full of people without a man in front at the pointy end driving it? I just can't see it, not in the foreseeable future.
Maybe we should just have a man up there, just a big red button that just says go
and stop.
Go and stop.
Just 2 buttons.
Kind
of like a train driver.
Ooh. Controversial. Controversial.
We'll cut that bit out.
We'll get ourselves sued by the railway. Oh no. So I just thought this was like a classic case of just human errors in the design, like just fundamentally in the design, and then the political pressure to get this thing back online for production's sake, and
human errors in the safety management, human errors in the education of the people running the thing, and then human errors on the night.
Yeah.
I say it. Old news.
Let's just have a look at the disaster itself and some of the sort of the immediate impact of it. And I went to look at the number of deaths that were caused by the accident itself.
I was surprised by how few there was.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look, the numbers of deaths, there's only 2 at the initial explosion, isn't there? Which is, and then the exact sort of number directly attributable is 31. And then 64, including people who die sort of in the first couple of days. 64 just seems like a remarkably small number. Yeah. There's another commission which sort of looked as at the Chernobyl forum. It's obviously sort of a worthy forum of different sort of people who investigate these things, and they approximate about 4,000 deaths all told.
All right,
including all the clear-up crews and so on that over the next couple of weeks. Where apparently there was people there that they were only supposed to work 40 seconds
right
at the site. No, because essentially the first bit was just to pick up lumps of the carbon and or whatever that had come out of the explosion and just literally shovel it back into the edge of the building. So it was just all in one place. And these people were only supposed to work 40 seconds, and people got radiation doses that were just
sky high,
vast. And there's a little sort of note I made, which I spotted. The estimate is that the global radiation dose that we all got, if you were to take the entire human population, is about 21 extra days of natural background radiation. That's extremely unevenly distributed, and they reckon some of the people that worked on the site, that were called the liquidators, who were liquidating the site, they reckon they got 50 years of natural radiation dose in the time that they worked there. And of course these are all the people that died very, very quickly.
One of the things I did read, the helicopter pilots, they used helicopters to drop lead and various other neutron absorbing things onto the fire. And at first they were hovering above the fire, dropping their load and then flying away, but they had to stop that because the helicopter pilots were getting too much of a radiation dose. So they had to drop the stuff on the move
as they flew over,
which made them very inaccurate, and actually they think it possibly made it worse because it spread nuclear particles around, and also because it fell in the wrong place, it may have made the place hotter and led to it reigniting again a few days after the main fire.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I suppose at this point, the world had never seen anything like this before. So I think a lot of people are very quick to criticise authorities for doing that kind of thing and maybe cocking it up. But really, they were inventing processes on the fly.
Yeah.
What do you do? Yeah, I mean, it must have just been one of the most appalling things to deal with. And again, it's very easy to criticise emergency workers and party officials and things that perhaps were sending people into that, but they bore that responsibility of sending people into that. The military commanders and so on. Exceptionally brave people to do
the
what
firemen and so on who did what they did.
And the military workers and so on, and the people who then went on to build the surrounding. Well, do you remember how excited I was discovering the word taxidermy in the Dolly the Sheep episode?
Yes.
I'm also very excited to have the word sarcophagus in this one. This is not a word you get to use. But yeah, the guys who built the sarcophagus, incredibly brave as well. The massive exposures over sort of weeks and weeks of work.
Did you read about the tunnel they built? They dug a tunnel. Took them 15 days to dig a tunnel from, I think it went from Chernobyl 3 under Chernobyl 4. So this is while there's still a radioactive fire going on above them, and they put down a cooled concrete slab.
Oh yes,
underneath
that's right. Yeah,
it took them 15 days to do that.
Wow.
It was just like that shows what can be done when it's urgent, and also again the bravery of workers willing to dig a tunnel underneath a burning.
Yeah,
nuclear
you wonder how much people still don't understand the risks. People who at that point, how little educated people were, or like if there's poison in the air, people can taste it, or they start to cry or whatever, or they people fall over. There's always the problem with radiation, isn't it?
You can't tell that's there.
Yeah, you can't see it. Apparently, there is a taste to it, isn't there? If there's a lot of it, you get like
a metallic taste.
A metallic taste, yeah. Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. There was another 3 deaths that didn't happen, which I thought was quite interesting. So part of that tunnel thing is the original plan was to freeze the ground underneath, because there was this space where there was a big water pool, and the worry was that the heat of the fire would boil the water in the water pool underneath the reactor, and this would lead to another big steam explosion. And steam explosions are to be avoided. They're unbelievably dramatic. And the idea was they were going to inject liquid nitrogen.
Right.
Yeah. And this plan is abandoned because I think they worked it out. It's sort of 25 tons of liquid nitrogen a day, which is just something which is very expensive in terms of energy, and it wasn't going to be practicable. So that's right. The cooled concrete slab is what they put in place of that cooling machinery. That liquid nitrogen idea sort of goes by, and that's what they do. But I didn't know about the tunnel aspect. They do that, and so that sort of stabilizes the site by putting this big cool concrete slab in, and then they start to build on top of it to sort of keep it contained. But yeah, there's these 3 deaths whereby they have to get the water out of this pool, right? The 3 deaths that don't happen. There's 3 guys who go in with respirators and suits and whatever, and they plodge through a whole load of radioactive water to get to the valves.
Good Geordie word.
Good Geordie word. Plodge, northeastern word. Yeah, they paddle through this water, in translation.
No, they don't paddle. They're only paddling if their feet come out the water.
This is true.
I doubt their feet came out the water, so they would have been plodging.
This is true. And so they open the valves and they get this water out of there, right? And there's this huge mythos around that these 3 guys, who I won't try and name them because I can't pronounce the Russian names, but they died. This was a suicide mission and so on. And years later, there's a journalist looked into it and found that there was one guy was retired, another guy was still working in the nuclear industry, and the 3rd guy had died of heart failure in 2005. I think there's a certain amount of myth building that surrounds this. And I also wonder what drives that. That's
myth building. What drives myth building around the nuclear industry?
Fear. Fear in a big way, isn't it? Yeah.
I think there's a natural bit of human nature that just wants to have heroes, and a dead hero who went out and gave his life to empty the pond is more interesting than a hero who's still
and can't be criticised.
Yeah.
They just become martyrs to an idea, or because that leads nicely into sort of this idea of which is kind of the next part. Is the Chernobyl is a cultural icon. It has become this weird sort of centre for you can go and visit. Pripyat is one of these things that is a city that was abandoned in the evacuation, but it appears in sort of YouTube videos and Vice Media and BuzzFeed and so on. The guarantee all of those will have done let's go visit Pripyat, the abandoned city, and they go around and poke around the school, and there's still school books hanging around the classrooms, or
teddy bears or dolls lying.
Yeah, and it's like, are you bored of it?
I'm actually not. I'm well into that kind of clickbait.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And what I am possibly bored of is the sort of the zombie thing that goes with it. As if there's been at least one film set in Pripyat which is zombie based. When you see these things on YouTube, they'll very often, it won't, the thing that gets you to click on it won't just be a picture of Pripyat. There'll be pictures of sort of desperate looking people or zombie like people coming towards you.
The zombie city of Pripyat.
I'm bored of that kind of nonsense, but I wouldn't say I'm bored of.
It's just you all see the same cliches, particularly the theme, the amusement park with the the rides that have been abandoned. Of course, that's something that abandoned theme parks and amusement parks have been like a trope of Scooby Doo and that kind of thing for a long time, haven't they? And it just seems like a load of really lazy quality journalism where perhaps there's...
I love all that. I love all that. I love all the the videos on YouTube of abandoned theme parks and abandoned hospitals and things like that.
Yeah. Oh, well, is it the 20-something days later? Is it 28 days later?
28 days later,
yeah. The 28 days later urban exploration website is well worth passing the time. If you ever want to waste time, that's a very good time sink. It is this sort of weird cultural thing. Just on Pripyat, the evacuation, they reckon in total there was an evacuation of 350,000 people. It's a huge amount of people. It's a third of a million. But in the peculiarity of the planned economy of the Soviet Union, they reckon that actually there was a small economic benefit to that, because a lot of those people then moved to places where there was labour shortages in other industries, which is kind of get the perverse incentives of planned economies. But there was also another thing I came across where they were saying that if you look at the health exposure a lot of those people had just moving to big cities, places like Kiev and Minsk and so on, that obviously they're exposed to air pollution and the rigors of city life. People who've remained, who've refused to evacuate, who've remained in the area of Pripyat and the environs, they've tended to live longer.
Right.
So there's some thought that really there should have been more intensive efforts to decontaminate and just let people continue to live there. Although I guess it may have had sort of a little economic reason to exist. Do you remember there was a BBC thing a while ago where they were walking around Pripyat and one of their meters kind of whistled, and they picked up the clod of earth that had the radioactive particle in it, and they just kept dividing the pile of earth in two
until they found which bit of it. Right?
Yeah, and there was this tiny speck, and it was obviously that's actually a piece of the core that had sort of come out of the reactor.
Right.
And it was really quite interesting. There's like the end of a tip of a ballpoint pen kind of size. And I suppose the land is totally contaminated with that. Gorbachev is in power by this point.
I would have said that would be early in his
It is, yeah. Gorbachev comes to power as the General Secretary of the CPSU in the 11th of March 1985.
The CPSU?
The Communist Party of the Soviet Union. His power base is still quite weak at this point. He's still building up his sort of securing his position, I guess, because they've gone through this terrible period of Andropov, who comes to power and then promptly dies, and then Chernenko, who comes to power and dies even quicker, and then they don't they go for a period of like 3 weeks where they can't admit that.
Yes, I can quite clearly remember that happening.
Yeah,
when we all knew he was dead.
Yeah. This large country is rudderless, but we're not going to admit to it because it's too embarrassing. And so he's building it up. But there are two policies that Gorbachev is famous for.
Perestroika,
which is
that freedom or is that
restructuring? Yeah, and the other one.
What did I just say? Was that perestroika?
That was perestroika. Soviet politics quiz 101.
Oh.
Glasnost.
Now that's openness.
Openness, yeah. Interestingly, right, the whole sort of farce of the announcement of this disaster and how it takes so long. In fact, the West doesn't discover of this until the 20th of April, 2 days, and we only find out because there's a Swedish nuclear power station 1,000 kilometers away. Their radiation detectors went off, right, and they're the first people to blow the whistle because obviously they think it's their plant, and then they go, oh no, hang on.
Yeah, and they send aeroplanes up to check the atmosphere.
That's right, and they know which way the wind is blowing over the last couple of days, and this is how we in the West discover this. So we get this sort of a gradual bit by bit announcement, and apparently the very first announcement by TASS, apparently they said, well, we've had this fire, but the Americans had 3 Mile Island and wasn't that terrible, and look at the disaster that caused. But
instead of just saying, yes, we've had a horrible disaster, please help.
Yeah, we need help. We need everybody to come together. We forget how bad it was. I think we forget that the Soviet Union was so closed and so frightened of it being embarrassed in public.
Old news.
So there are people who study these disaster events, and they talk about these number of steps it takes for a disaster to happen, and there's 10 or 12. I can't remember the top of my head now, but the case I read about originally was the Helder Free Enterprise disaster. The ferry that tipped over, and for a big loss of life, a big disaster to happen, you need these sort of number of steps. And if your safety management system can intervene at any point and stop just one of those steps, you might have a near miss. You still might have a system that is somewhat unsafe, but it prevents big disasters from happening, you know. And I suppose that kind of risk assessment and thinking in that way didn't really sort of come in. Everything had been very ad hoc in a lot of industries up until this point, perhaps.
Yeah.
Old news.
So what's happened since then, Russell?
What's happened since? Oh dear. The cheesy links, I think, is the is the word for that.
There's something that whoever makes cheese strings has missed. Cheesy links.
Cheesy links, would that be
chains of
cheese? Yeah. Patent pending. Right, okay, so there are various things which have happened since, which it amazes me how long the Ukraine was still dependent on the power from that power station, and that although Units 5 and 6 were never built, Units 1, 2 and 3 continued to generate power.
Yeah.
For like a good number of years and weren't shut down until like the early 2000s. They needed the power, right, so they had no choice, but they didn't shut down until they got money for investment in other things, and that was largely through loans from the EU. You kind of forget that there are a lot of countries in Western Europe that in the subsequent years are desperate to stop this source of pollution, because every time the wind blows, you know, it's coming at them, you know, or the risk is there. And over time, the sarcophagus that was built in, there's that word again, woohoo. So I mean, that was built in a matter of months. That was finished by the December of that year. I mean, the accident happens when in the April. So months, remarkable. But obviously, it's of very poor quality, and it's like has started to fall apart. Like famously, for years and years now, there's been film of birds nesting inside the sarcophagus and flying in and out and whatever. It's amazing how life has this way of kind of holding on, as previously discussed in the cloning episode. So there's this like huge project to build a new sarcophagus, which I don't think you've ever seen any of the animations of. But essentially this large aircraft hangar type structure, it's a big sort of dome structure. Oh, not domed.
Arch
structure that is then built on rails and is then going to be pushed over the entire show, and that has a lifetime of X 100 years.
Are they going to close up the end? There must be.
Yeah, that's the idea. Yeah, and so this will become like an outer sarcophagus to keep it contained. I mean, various estimates sort of exist as to how long it'll take. I imagine it'll still be there once we're gone, and there for many hundreds of years, I suppose. And then there'll be somebody else building an even larger thing to go over the top of that. It's some point. I mean, in some ways, what you've got is a nuclear. Okay, it's very dramatic, but it's the same problem with nuclear waste.
Yeah, you're just storing it somewhere as safe as you can for as long as you can
until it goes away, which is potentially thousands of years.
Yeah, when the dinosaurs reappear or something.
I remember I'm sure there's something about Welsh sheep in Chernobyl.
I don't think there's any Welsh sheep in Chernobyl.
In Chernobyl. Clone sheep in Chernobyl. However, so I was looking at this thing, I had the half memory about, isn't there something about Welsh sheep in Chernobyl? And I was wondering what that was all about. So I looked it up. It's not just Welsh sheep, it's Cumbrian sheep as well. So there was 327 farms that was still monitoring the radiation level in their sheep. And it was where they had been grazed on the higher land, that land had been part contaminated by dust. And if the sheep failed the radiation test, they had to then be moved to lower ground for like a certain amount of time and retested before they could then be sold on the market.
Right.
And this was only stopped in June 2012. So this is a good number of years after the main event, you know, and this is in Cumbria and North Wales. So it has finally ended, but it also says that, you know, there probably is just occasionally an irradiated sheep that
sneaks through.
It's obviously of such a low risk now, you know, that
you can tell those ones that their eyes are less dead. They glow more.
They have the green glow, right? Glow, yeah. The PR people of the nuclear industry must be sort of going, what are you talking about? Yeah. So one of the things that strikes me, I mean, we've been very quick to condemn, you know, the appalling design failures here, and yet what happens at Fukushima in 2011? You know, they get inundated. Well, they've built a the thing by the sea.
Yeah.
In a tsunami-prone area. Okay, you can sort of understand some of the arguments about, well, it's behind a seawall, we're not expecting a wave this big. But really?
Yeah, you're going to risk that?
And there's, oh, well, if it lost cooling, we have emergency backup. That sounds familiar.
Yeah.
But of course they didn't. And I just find it spectacularly stupid. These are like incredibly clever, learned people, the planners and the engineers and the politicians who make these decisions. It just baffles me. How do you get to that state where everybody's convinced that this is a good idea? And this is the things like, I'm not anti-nuclear because it's like potentially dangerous in some places. Like here in the UK, we are geologically we're tectonically incredibly stable.
Yeah.
We're not going to be inundated by a tsunami wave anytime soon. And it just seems strange that such a thing happened there, like in lots of ways, like the kind of the thinking, the lead up to it years earlier in the when the plant was built is in some way much the same. Well, the other thing I thought was interesting that reflects the previous experience in Chernobyl was that people think of it as a nuclear explosion because it's not. It's an overheating and a steam explosion
and a fire.
And then subsequently fire. But people think of it, oh, it's a nuclear explosion. It's not. And similarly, the very famous bit of video of Fukushima Daiichi exploding is when they've reintroduced water. The water disassociates into its hydrogen and its oxygen. The hydrogen builds up in the building, and then that ignites it.
Right.
So that's actually a hydrogen explosion.
Right.
So you've still got all the overheating and the thing like going into like a meltdown, a part meltdown or whatever. But again, people see this explosion and go, it's a nuclear explosion. It's like, Nope. I'm not pretending to understand the technology to any great depth, but yeah, one of the things that immediately happens after Chernobyl is the new build rate of nuclear power plants just flatlines.
Yes.
That growth just sort of disappears. So I suppose subsequently with us, the only one we opened was Sizewell B, and because you've got this sort of thing, this sort of decision making in recent years now. Germany under Merkel decided to
close them all down, go non-nuclear.
Yeah, which as opposed to Switzerland, you mentioned this about Switzerland.
Yeah, so just the other day they had a vote. I think it was on Sunday. Was it on Sunday? I think it was on Sunday. They had another referendum to decide whether they were going to go non-nuclear. I think they had a target date for like 2050 or something like that. But the no side, which is to keep nuclear, won. I think that good old 52-48 sort of break comes to mind. I might have that wrong.
Then of course the more sort of relevant thing is the UK deciding to build stuff at Hinkley Point. And like broadly over the years, I've been a supporter of nuclear power on the whole. That it's kind of I always see it as like a stopgap towards something better.
Yeah.
Be it more renewable or fusion power, which I'm sure we'll have in 50 years' time.
There's not 30 years.
Is it 30 years? This is the standard.
Every 30 years, it's 30 years, yeah.
In 30 years' time, yeah. To me, obviously, with the refusal to build anything more, we've lost our industrial base for it. We've lost our skills base to a large degree. And so we're relying on French and
Chinese.
The Chinese, which I find concerning.
Yeah, definitely. I don't like the fact we're relying on Chinese government-owned industry to build nuclear power stations. I
mean, I don't mind so much the French. I mean, the French have a very strong track record, but even they have their concerns about the design exposing, as to whether they're economic, whether they are going to be successful as they're sort of planning, aren't they? The French already have one under construction to that design, and it's very badly over budget and late and whatever. Right. And what's already proving to be an extremely expensive project, you just got this feeling, oh dear. Nuclear plants in the UK have a history of being late and over budget in the past, and you think, could this be another one? And the money will just be leached away to Chinese and French contractors. So yeah, we need electricity, but I'm kind of a bit of a skeptic. But in the absence of getting people to agree to do other things, then I guess that's all we've got. Yeah, so that was Chernobyl.
It's old news.
The standard traditional thank yous and how to get in touch with us. You can listen to us and leave comments on our website, www.oldnews.podbean.com.
And you can burst into type with the old-fashioned email at oldnewspod@gmail.com.
You can go to our Facebook page, just search for Old News Podcast.
Twitter at oldnewspod.
And we have to thank bensound.com for their royalty-free music.
And of course, the dulcet tones of Peter Kitson, who provides our fantastic interjections.
And we should also mention that we're on YouTube as well. Again, just search for Old News Podcast on YouTube.
If you have any difficulty, get in touch and let us know. I think that about wraps it up for this episode. I've enjoyed it. Yeah. It's been another sort of engineering one, I think, but not
overly sciencey
and overly detailed.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been great. So let's say goodbye, shall we?
Thanks for listening. See you in a fortnight's time.
So you're committing us to a schedule there. We will be nailed to that cross. But on that note, goodbye.